Hi everyone, Daniel here. I am the creator of the relationship model of addiction. If I was asked what kind of therapy, if you asked me what kind of therapist am I, what kind of work do I do, I would say that I am a self and relationship-based therapist with a focus on your experience, always asking, always looking at what your experience is. What are you going through around in any given situation? And I wanted to share with you a little bit today about how I got here, and in terms of being a self and relationship-based therapist, focusing on experience. And I also want to honor the person who inspired me and a mentor of mine, that where I think that my being a self and relationship-based therapist goes back to, I could trace this back to a seed that was planted when I was studying R.D. Laing. R.D. Laing is a very famous psychiatrist in the late 60s and early 70s. He's a radical, maverick kind of psychiatrist. And I read several of his books and was very influenced by them. And one of his concepts that really hit me, really went deep, to start me thinking a lot and exploring about what the implications are of what this concept is. It was so powerful. He was talking about the difference between true guilt and false guilt. True guilt and false guilt. And this was all completely new to me at the time. This was like 30 years ago, and I'm learning about this. So just very early on in my career, probably around before I even started seeing clients, but really was intrigued by, well, what is the difference here? What is he talking about between true guilt and false guilt? And what he was saying was that true guilt has to do with the guilt that you feel, the discomfort, disease, kind of a self-betrayal. He's referring to true guilt as a feeling that you have when you are not congruent, when you're not true to yourself, when you're not acting in a way that is consistent with your highest values and your highest purpose, and kind of with the sense of who you are, how you want to be, the kind of life you want to be, the kind of person you are. So when you betray that, there's going to be a reaction, there's going to be a consequence. And he uses the word guilt, but I think of it as a real signal, a signal that's going on that ding, 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 something, I am not being true to myself, and therefore I am paying a price, and I'm doing myself a disservice and injustice. It's me that I'm answering to. And it's me that I betrayed. It's me that there's something deep inside of me that I haven't acted or said something in a way that really is congruent or reflective of what my true experience is. False guilt, on the other hand, has to do with the guilt that you feel from when you do not conform to an external authority. Another way of putting it is shoulds. All the shoulds that you have, that the programming that is internalized and instilled in us all, that has to do with our parents, parental influence, societal influence. But it's really where we look up to and define ourselves according to these dictates that are from external authorities. And so whenever we're not doing what we're supposed to do, whether there's going to be a guilt about that. And it's, and of course I'm thinking of the church, where if you sin, you do something where you're not supposed to do, where it's wrong, and then you suffer that guilt. This is false guilt. This has to do with a dissonance and a discomfort, and guilt is a good word, that comes up when you are not doing what you were told you should be doing. So another way of thinking of this, the difference between true guilt and false guilt, is one is being and one is doing. One has more to do with yourself. When you betray yourself, it's really the being that is your deep essence, your higher, wiser, truer, essential self. It's your true higher self. And the false guilt has to do with the externally based, we talked about this a lot, the externally based self that you have, where your well-being and your self-worth is based on being good and following, doing all of the, being a good girl or being a good boy and doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. Okay, so this was something that I was learning about 30 years ago, and how I evolved this and applied this. As I said, I became a self and relationship-based therapist, which means a lot of the work that I do is about developing the relationship with yourself. And how I applied this, incorporated it into the relationship model of addiction and the 3 stages of recovery is, for example, the first stage that I talk about, a first stage of recovery, is breaking up and dismantling denial. You have to break up in your means of relief. So how does the true guilt and false guilt apply to this? Well, when you're breaking up, when you're going through the first stage of recovery, and you're breaking up and you're dismantling denial, one of the biggest hurdles is, for most people, almost everyone, has to deal with the first step of the first step of the process is recognizing and admitting that you're powerless, that you're out of control. So that when you realize that, when you dismantle denial enough to be able to see that you're completely out of control and powerless, both kind of guilts can come up with this, and so it'd be good for you to be able to distinguish between the two, so you could kind of navigate your own way through, on your journey of recovery. So when you're feeling powerless, and when you recognize and admit that you're powerless, the false guilt around that is that we have oftentimes have an image of ourselves of how we're supposed to be, that we're supposed to be in control all the time. If whatever relationship, whatever involvement you have with your means of relief, you're supposed to, you have willpower, you have choice, you're supposed to be able to handle yourself, control yourself, and when you can't do it, upon recognizing and admitting this first step, there's a deflation, there's a self-doubt, there's a worthlessness that comes, there's a feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough, and it really feels like at the core of your being that you failed or that you've fallen short in some way. But this is false guilt, that feeling, because you have internalized this idea of how you're supposed to be, which is having it together, being powerful, being in control. So that is recognizing that can help you come to terms with it and not feel so bad, because you could see that where it's come from. It's externally based, it's conditioning of kind of how you hold yourself and how you see yourself, which you don't no longer have to ascribe to once you see that it's externally based. However, you also, in this first stage of recovery, breaking up, dismantling denial, you'll also experience the true guilt of when you recognize that you have this relationship with this means of relief and it's destroying your life and you're out of control. How the true guilt comes up is that I have not been taking care of myself. I have not been true to myself. I have not been the person I want to be. I have not been expressing what's true inside of me. I have not been doing what's most important to me. And so when you get in touch with that true guilt, it's a different kind of motivation for you when you go through recovery. We're looking for, as you break up and dismantle denial, what happens, what's the second stage of recovery? The second stage is developing a relationship with yourself. So it's this beginning in this first stage of this true guilt, being able to identify it and experience it, because that is going to motivate you, and really with a hunger and a deep desire from deep within yourself to want to begin identify what yourself is and begin developing that relationship with yourself. And you'll be really driven and motivated to do that when you can experience and become conscious of how you've abandoned yourself and how you've neglected yourself and how you've forgotten yourself, and you'll have just a different kind of motivation to discover and reclaim that relationship with yourself. So this is how a concept that I learned about 30 years ago grew into my identity, my professional identity. I call myself a self and relationship-based therapist with a real focus on experience from R.D. Laing, and evolved that into the relationship model of addiction. So I hope this helps you. This is how you could use this is just be more mindful of what the distinction is between true guilt and false guilt, and what is really true when you're coming from your true self versus when you're coming from your false self, which is externally based from an authority place of how you're supposed to be or should be. Okay, so until we meet again, feel free to comment on this, ask questions. I'd love to dialogue with you further. And until then, the quality of your relationships is the quality of your life.